Hey, and welcome to our Facebook Live today. You are noticing that I have a guest in the well, not a guest. Chris, you're a guest, I guess. Down over here. Chris, say hi.
Hi.
So, for those of you who aren't familiar, Chris Bowman is our UI UX designer over at Sprout Studio, and so Chris, tell the fine folks a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I do basically the main part of the design. So I'm a user interface designer and software developer that works on Sprout. Um, my background is a couple things. I teach web design actually part time as well at a local college. So I teach web design and business of the web and all that. And then I also, before Sprout, I actually worked. That's how Brian actually met me. Is because he came to me to get his website done years ago, many, many years ago. I don't remember if you remember that.
That's
Um,
still my existing website. I haven't updated it in a little while.
yeah. So we ran a web studio a long time ago. And he came to us and stuff, and that's when we started Sprout.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So today, for the last few days, for everyone that's watching in this 14-day challenge, we've been talking a lot about your website and talking about how you can turn your website into a more effective sales tool in your photography business. To kind of fill in the sort of background on this, no matter what you do from a marketing perspective, from an advertising perspective, and we're going to go through a whole bunch of ideas in the coming days for different programs you can run, different promotions you can run, different ways that you can generate some quick revenue in your business during these difficult times. But at the end of the day, no matter what you do, no matter what program you run, no matter where you advertise yourself, there's a really good chance that folks are going to find themselves on your website. They're going to go and they're going to Google you. And that's why we decided to spend some time here at the beginning of this 14-day challenge, really focusing on your website and figuring out what you can do to make your website the most effective sales tool that it possibly can be. And so on day one, we talked about language and tone and how you can make sure you're telling the right story to people that come to your website, and how you can guide them through your website and through the experience of going through your portfolio and all the different content on your page. Yesterday on day two, we talked about your portfolio and how you can actually optimize the images that you have on there, and different ways that you want to present images, and how you can present images, how you can tell stories and incorporate testimonials into those. And we walked through a whole bunch of ideas there. Today, on day three, the reason we're bringing Chris on for this one is because we wanted to talk a lot more about the user interface, the user experience, the sort of the design side, the makeup, if you will, of your website. And these are things like buttons and navigation and colors and aesthetic and layout and image sizes and different things like that. And again, thought there's no better person that I know to have this conversation than Chris. And so let's kind of kick it off. Chris, we have a whole bunch of different ideas that we can run through them, and I think obviously you and I work together every single day, so I know that we can go on for a long time about pretty much any topic as it relates to UI UX design. But let's just, I guess, kick it off. And for those of you who are watching live, if you want to weigh in your thoughts, say shoe. I thought I was seeing double. Yeah, Chris, we both. I'm glad that you got the memo about the blue shirt and the beard
Yeah.
and the glasses and the headphones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I put the beard on this morning to match.
me too. Yeah, yeah. Likewise. Uh, yeah. So if you're watching live, if you want to throw in your 2 cents, we would love to hear what you have to say about these things. I'm sure that you found in your business there's things that are going to work certain ways or work better for certain clients or for certain markets than perhaps for others. Yesterday, at the end of the program, or the Facebook Live, I talked about a tool that I know we use, Chris, at Sprout. And I know that you've used similar tools in other websites that you've built, but we use Mouseflow, and I recommended it. I sort of prescribed it to everyone watching to say the best way to understand how people work through your website, how people visit your website and walk through the experience of working with you on the web, is by watching what they're doing. And it sounds kind of a little bit creepy. It sounds very big brotherish, but you can actually see what people are doing on the web. And so all these things that Chris and I are about to throw your way, my biggest suggestion would be to add on to what we talked about yesterday, and that is test it. Take a look at, do these things on your website and see how they're having an effect on your website. So, again, if you guys have thoughts and you want to throw ideas at us, please don't hesitate. If you want to, you know, um, debate topics, we're happy to discuss really anything. These lives are meant to be interactive, so if you want to throw your 2 cents in, then we'd love to hear it. So, Chris, do you want to kick it off and let's go into, I guess, tip number 1. What would be the first thing as it relates to UI or UX or design that you would say, let's focus on this for today?
Oh, absolutely. I think just the big part about it is a lot of people will focus on making things look good. So they'll really focus on the aesthetics. And realistically, design is important. Like I love design. So to me, of course, design is really, really important. And I know as photographers, making things look really good is a big part of why people would hire a specific photographer, for example. Though on the web, it's a little different. So content is actually a lot more important. So really showcasing your images, really connecting with people with your messaging is actually probably one of the biggest parts of making an effective website. Would you agree, Brian?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why it was important for us to start on day 1 with content.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I mean, there's the whole, and I know that we talked about it there on day 1, so I don't want to beat the dead horse on this, but
for sure,
a lot of photographers will look at their website as a portfolio, and then right before they launch the website, they're like, oh, I need to write an about page. And then, they kind of rush together and throw some quick thing together. Hey, right. Jody, Rebecca's watching. Hey. So yeah, I mean, that's something that I think is important. I think that's what you're saying too, right, Chris? Where it's like, don't just think of your website as a pretty template. I think that would be the number one thing that I would say for photographers is when you're looking at your website, if you go and pull up your website today, because that's what today's challenge is, and bonus points, by the way, because it's Friday, so now you have Saturday and Sunday to do this. So you have extra time to do all the things that Chris and I talk about today, because we're not doing the next one till Monday. Hey, Rebecca. So don't just look at your website as a template. Hey, Rob Knowles in the house. Hey, Rob. You need to really consider the content that goes into your website, which again, Chris, is what you're saying, right?
Yes, exactly.
I caught you mid-drink. I noticed.
Yeah, you did.
I waited for you to lift up your coffee cup.
Yeah, very good. I just want to showcase the Starbucks cup. I don't have my Sprout cup with me, nice. So absolutely. And I think just simplifying the whole process, right, is really, really important. Like making sure that navigation bar at the top. I mean, less is more. Absolutely, when it comes to your navigation bar, just really getting into the meat of the website is important. And be really simple. Like we could talk about all kinds of different things we could talk about this morning with talking about different colors that you could use. We can get into color psychology. We could do all kinds of things that way. But I think, first and foremost is simplicity and content. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's jump into, let's start at the top of a photographer's website. So most websites are laid out in a similar fashion, right? Where at the top, you've got some branding element, which is probably your logo, and then you have the navigation bar. Let's talk about that because it's a potential. It's alluring to just want to throw as much as you possibly can into that navigation bar. And obviously, I think some of the conversations that we had on day 1 when we talked about, what kinds of pages your website should have, and not just seeing it as portfolio, contact, about, pricing, like looking at it more as a guided experience. But with that, Chris, like what's your thoughts on sort of navigation and how can photographers do some tweaks on their existing site to make navigation and navigating through the site perhaps a little bit easier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just we tend to want to, when we go ahead and be creative, we tend to want to make things a little bit more complicated. So, for example, you'll want to put the about page. So you mentioned not having the about page the other day, I believe, right? So, and really the whole website should be about you. But then also just using terminology that people automatically connect with is really, really important.
Right.
So for example, I've always seen a lot of clients, they'll want to say, like, instead of a contact page, they'll say, well, I'll have a locations page, for example, right? Not really necessary for photographers, of course, but I mean, just as an example, and it doesn't really make sense, right? Or having your careers page be called like, upcoming job opportunities. Like, it's just a weird thing to call it, even though it looks more interesting. It's really disconnecting with people because they're not going to instantly make that connection of what that page is. So trying to be as simple as possible when you're naming your pages makes a lot of sense. And then just go through it. Like sit back, go through the site after you put it together and say, okay, if I was a potential client, what would I want to look at first? And just making it that easy, right? Like pick the goals, like list a couple goals that your client will have, 1, 2, 3, of looking at it, right? So what are they going to want to know? They might want to know, what kind of investment it is to be able to go with you. They might want to look at some of your photography, like if you're shooting weddings and they're looking for you as a wedding photographer, they might want to see what weddings you do, what your wedding photography looks like. And then ultimately, I would hope they want to contact you, right? So they're going to want to get a quote from you or start the booking process with you, right? So having that big, beautiful book me button in the top right makes a lot of sense. We also try to want to be, a lot of times too, when we're designing something, we don't want it to look like the other guy. So we don't want our website to look the same as everybody else's. So we'll, instead of logo in the top left, we want to put it in the middle, or we want to have, instead of a horizontal navigation, we want a vertical navigation. And it's fine to do those things, but just remember there's a reason why everybody does it a certain way, is because that's the most comfortable for people. And we want to look at our sales process. Our website is part of our sales process, right? And we want to simplify and streamline our sales process.
Question about website navigation and your nav bar. It seems to be a trend that a lot of templates are actually going away from having the nav bar itself and having navigation on the page, and instead burying it underneath a hamburger menu, the 3 lines. For those that don't know what I'm talking about, the 3 lines. I mean, obviously for mobile, that's a consideration that we have to make because we don't have the room for it. But Chris, what are your thoughts on sites that do that on desktop?
So they're beautiful, right? I mean, to simply just have your logo in the top left-hand corner and that 3 lines in the top right is definitely an aesthetic piece. However, it's not a usability piece. Mm-hmm. There was actually a really big company, I can't remember the name of the website, but a really big website in the US, and they actually saw their engagement to other pages fall considerably. Like over 50% of less people were actually clicking around on their website because they switched to a hamburger menu. They switched exclusively to that. Mm-hmm. And they didn't put it 2 and 2 together at first. So they actually, at first we were like, okay, what can we optimize? And then all of a sudden someone realized, hey, maybe our traffic has become so much more quiet because of this. So let's just try to put it back. And it shot right back up again. So, I mean, yes, they are beautiful, but there's definitely a cost to kind of going against the grain there. People just don't see it necessarily as something to click. Like, you're going to know your audience best, but generally speaking, people don't know it's something that they can click as the menu to navigate your website.
Yeah. I think the thing that's like really interesting for photographers to think about as it relates to this is sometimes the things that almost seem so obvious are obvious, and we try to get all cutesy and nice and pretty about it. And I know that's something like Chris, you and I, we talk about and subscribe to a lot, Building a Story Brand, Donald Miller's book. And if you haven't read that book, for those of you that are watching, definitely encourage you to go and grab that, because although he doesn't talk about web design, he talks about how to give an experience and how to guide an experience, and that really is what we're doing on the web. But I know, just a quick example, I know that for me on my website, one of the things that I thought was like, there's no way this would be it. I had the typical bar at the top, and I even had like step 1, step 2, step 3. That surprisingly is helpful in guiding people. Like a simple being like, start here, then go here, then go here, then go here. And I talked about the buffet menu idea back on day number 1. But that idea of just putting a number in front of the menu items, I've watched on Mouseflow how people literally will click like to the next page and they won't skip one because they feel like they're breaking the story up in a weird way. And something simple like that, it almost seems like there's no, come on, people are smarter than that. Like, they know that they can click whatever button they want to click, but they don't. Like, they'll go in that order.
Yeah, it's so true, right? I think the easiest way to look at it is like, if you were to just kind of tunnel vision yourself for a second and look at a website and navigate a website like that as you're kind of frantically looking around. Believe it or not, that's how most people use the web. So they're just simply looking for what's the most obvious thing to click that's closest to what they're looking for. So being able to make it as clear as possible, step by step with those numbers, I would assume is just simply clarifying things for people, right? Because again, that's the importance of keeping things simple, keeping navigation really, really simple. Just because you're just, it's going to hurt you if you don't. Like, it really will, right?
Yeah. No, I love it. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about like colors and consistency, and colors and theming and things like that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So what I do is anytime I go ahead and design a website, what I'll do is I'll pick one primary color, right? So just like you're picking your goals for your website, you're going to pick your primary goal for your website and lead people to that, which is book you, by the way. Should always be book you. However, the primary color is the same idea. So I'm going to pick orange, or I'll pick purple, or whatever the color is. It should be your brand color most likely. But that's not only going to be your button color for your website, but that should also be all of your links. So every time you have a link to somewhere, it needs to be that color. And that's essential. A lot of times people will not do that, and they'll have their buttons a different color than their links, or they'll have their links without a color. And you're just making it more difficult for people to try to figure out how to navigate their website. You need to teach them along the way how to navigate your website, what's clickable and what isn't clickable. And color is one of the easiest ways to do that. But of course, just having one color on the site could be boring. Actually, not always. Sometimes monochromatic sites where there's just one color that they've picked can be really, really beautiful, especially with alongside photography. But it's okay to have 2 or 3 different colors, but mostly, like, I'll pick one primary and one secondary, and use that secondary not as links or anything like that, but just a way to add a splash of color to things. But I mean, realistically, even looking at colors, for example, orange buttons click better than green buttons or red buttons, which is kind of funny, right? So I mean, there is some color psychology, absolutely, to how you're coloring your links and all that as well. So just kind of keeping that in mind.
I want a couple thoughts on that, and I want to get your input on this. A lot of photographers, and we know, Chris, because we obviously are very aware of what's happening in visual trends and in how colors and styles and all that impact the way that people use the web, because we do R&D for that in Sprout. But a lot of trends seem to be going towards this direction of this very minimalist approach, right? This very, like, the pastel colors, the simplicity, the beautiful, the, like, all white, and just, a very thin outline border for buttons and things like that. And I wonder, that certainly looks pretty, like in the same we've talked about here, it looks pretty, but do you think that that's hurting photographers' websites by not having things that are perhaps more obvious or perhaps clearer to see? And if you're looking at it on a monitor, and that's the other thing you have to consider, is that monitors are different. Every the way that everybody views a monitor. Hey Brian, I seriously thought that kind of looks like Brian, but oh man. Okay, next time we do this, Chris, we're wearing different shirts. Okay.
Okay. Absolutely. I'll just get a different shirt right now.
That's it. Yeah. So again, like, those things look pretty, but if you're looking at it on a different monitor, if your contrast isn't great on the monitor, you may not even see that there's a button there for that, very pretty, very trendy, bordered outline kind of button. What are your thoughts on, like, balancing that? I know we've already talked a little bit about it, but when it comes to colors and things like that, do you still think it's important for a photographer to have, like, colors that are not just all pastels?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think this actually happened. It's funny that you mentioned it, because it really actually did happen. So I mean, if you go back 10 years ago, the big trend back then, the web is full of trends, just like every industry. But about 10 years ago, the web was full of trends called skeuomorphism. So it's a fancy word that basically means things look real, right? So a button has a drop shadow, it has some inner shadows, it has some gradient, and it looks very much like something you can press. If you remember back then, it probably was longer than 10 years ago, but even on your iPhone, like if you open up the Notes app, it looked like a notepad. If you open up I can't remember, but all the different apps that look like maybe leather bound or whatever, that was a huge trend back then, which is to look like real assets. I I think people got so sick of it that we did the opposite. So we went right to what was known as the trend after that was called flat design. So flat design was everything flat, right? So you're looking at solid colors, you're looking at no drop shadows, no gradients, no textures at all. And it was really, really pretty. But people found again that their engagement went down. People weren't clicking things. Things weren't as obvious to click. So Google, believe it or not, tried to solve this problem, and they called it material design. So what they did is said, okay, let's look at interfaces as basically how light would hit paper. So let's look at different layers of pieces of paper. So this button's a little bit higher off the piece of paper because you can press it. So therefore, it's going to have a different shadow than the heading or than this box over here or whatever. Again, we've moved on even from then now where drop shadows are even becoming more prevalent as really nice, big, beautiful, soft drop shadows you're starting to see. And the problem with flat design is it still has stuck around. So we're still seeing a lot of designs like that. And again, it is hurting engagement. And it's the same with color, like not using color that's engaging, using things that look like links is definitely a thing that's hurting engagement. It's not necessarily confusing people because I think, but more of like they just don't know that they can click it, right? So they're not going to certain pages of your website or they're not doing certain things, or it's just slowing them down altogether, right?
Yeah. And I think too, that's where like something like a mouse flow that we talked about before, that's going to help you because you're going to be able to see like, holy cow, like people are not clicking this button. Or I remember, again, just another quick example, but when I did a recent iteration, this is maybe a year or two ago on my site, I had, that 1, 2, 3, 4 at the top of the page, but at the bottom of each page, I put a next button. And that next button would guide them just to the next page. And to my like astonishment, that's what people ended up clicking all the time. It's like they would go through the content and click next and go through the content and click next. And again, that's an example, right, of like making things obvious. And not that we want to go away from it being pretty, but like it's more important to make sure that we can guide people on our website than it just looks pretty to the naked eye, because it might look pretty, but they're not going to book you because they're not going to know what to do. They're not going to know where to go. Mm-hmm. Right. One of the things I want to get your thoughts on, because I know that we've done a number of sites together, and obviously everything we do is Sprout. We follow this paradigm, this idea of creating a bit of a style guide, right? Like, taking everything you do. And I think that this is a really good exercise and a good way to wrap up this sort of challenge day today for photographers. Because again, we're not suggesting to photographers today that you go and completely break apart and redo your website. Although, I mean, certainly there's a benefit of that, but we're trying to help you photographers make quick wins during these difficult times, and how what can you do to do that. And creating that style guide, I have found, Chris, and I'm sure that you've found the same thing with working with clients in web design. It's clarifying to say like, okay, this is the color that I use, and this is how it's presented, and this is the width, and this is the font, and this is the this. What would you, let's just take that and say, that's the homework for photographers this weekend, to make a style guide and then implement it onto their website. What are the steps that a photographer should follow to create that style guide, and like what's on that style guide? Let's just break that apart a bit.
Sure, absolutely. So style guides are really, really fantastic. It's something that I do anytime I start a new design, and you're picking those colors at the beginning, you're picking everything. So you're picking your typography that you're going to use. So what font are you going to use? I'm not using fonts plural because, to be honest, less is more also with fonts, but that's another story. But 1 or 2 fonts max on an entire website is perfect. 1 font for your headings, 1 font for your paragraphs. But anyway,
Chris, just a quick question on that.
Digress. You go through. So pick your heading sizes, what they're going to look like. Pardon?
Oh yeah, sorry. We both turned into ET. Brian? We both turned into ET for a second there, I think. Question about the font thing is what kind of resource would you recommend to photographers? I mean, we're not designers, we're not web designers. There are resources and examples and tools out there that exist to help a photographer, find a good font pairing that they like. Would you just recommend, Googling like best font pairing, or what would you recommend just to kind of give some photographers some inspiration?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually a website called fontpair.co that takes, assuming that your website platform can use Google Fonts, but it's it's just a website literally that says, okay, here's all the different Google fonts. And if you haven't heard of Google Fonts before, Google basically publishes, I think they're up to like 1,000 fonts that are completely free. So they're free to use and free to use on the web, which is always an issue. And they work, which is awesome too. So it'll actually, like, if the user doesn't have that font on their device, it will download the font and use the font in the background automatically, which is really nice. But yeah, they're going to talk about pairing there. So it's fontpair.co. But then there's also another one. There's a really great resource for web designers called Smashing Magazine. And they have, I'm trying to remember what it is, but they had a wicked article on font pairing. I have to see if I can find it. But I can find it later. But okay. They have a wicked article just on kind of the rules, right? The rules really are your headings, so that bigger text that over top, it needs to look different than the paragraph. And it needs to, and sometimes you can do it in a couple ways. You can change the font weight, so whether it's bold or light, so the heading being bold and the paragraph being light, as well as size, of course. Headings should be larger, but you can also do it in typography. So you can have your as long as they contrast, right? So the heading could be a serif font, like a Garamond or something like that, and the body could be more like a Helvetica, or whatever, Open Sans. There's many options, right? And having that serif/sans serif difference also helps people a lot visually, right? You're trying to create this kind of visual rhythm, much like in music. You have rhythm. You actually have rhythm in design as well. So yeah, does that answer?
Yeah, no, for sure for font pairing. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So that's like a good resource to help photographers get some ideas and inspiration for that. So then taking that and going further, because I interrupted you talking about the style guide.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to pick your fonts in there. So what I would honestly recommend doing is go ahead, do some research this weekend, look at a bunch of websites and try to figure out what you like about them. So how are they doing their fonts? How are they doing their colors? What's the layout generally look like? Remembering that simplicity is a lot of times more important than going overboard with design, so having things more simple. But I mean, go ahead and saying, okay, what's the largest heading on my page going to look like? What's the one that's slightly smaller? And usually, to be honest, it's just smaller. It's not going to change much. And remember, you're using only colors. If your link color is blue, for example, don't have a blue heading. That's not clickable. If it's clickable, make it blue. If it's not clickable, don't make it blue. Like it's things like that we just, they're very obvious, but they're not, because you almost have to step back and think about it for a second to be like, oh yeah, of course. Why would, if it's not clickable, then I should make it look like a link. But it's those kind of mistakes that we see over and over and over again on websites that hurts people. And a style guide is a great place to just put it all in one place and figure out what you want to do. Or do your images have rounded borders? Do your buttons have rounded borders? Are your buttons just simply a border with no background color and it's white? All those things are things that you're thinking about in your style guide. And whether you want to open up, if you're a Photoshop user or an Illustrator user and you want to open up that and actually put it in there and help you that way, just so you can kind of see how they all jive together, that's a great place to start as well, right? So it depends on the web platform that you're using, the website platform you're using too. Sometimes they might have, you could just create a new page on it that's hidden, and you can play around with how your headings and your paragraphs jive.
Yeah. Have you, is that an exercise? Because I know that you have that, like we have that for Sprout, that we have like a separate page that we always go through, and any new element that we build, any new pop-up or window or page or anything, it's basically like in this little place that only we have access to. Now we're going to have users that try and find it. But it's a little web page that like we can use to see how it all looks together, how it interfaces, and how it all interacts together. Is that something that you'd recommend doing, like making a separate page on your website and just kind of saying like, this is what a paragraph looks like, this is what a this looks like, this is what a this looks like?
Yep. Yeah, because I think that's the important part is each page of your website, just to be clear, each page of your website needs to use the same heading styles, the same button styles, the same colors. Everything needs to be consistent. So having that one page where you can kind of just play with everything, like call it your playground or call it your style guide, and just kind of play with all the things together to see what they look like in a sandbox environment before you go ahead and make everything the same across your site. is really important because you get to see how they work together. Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're really interested in design, you want to start really deep diving. There's a principles. The kind of the basics of design start with what are known as the CRAP principles. So the contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. So CRAP. So if you Google CRAP, you'll get resources like that. And it just goes into how you can use, they're all tools, how you can use contrast to increase engagement on your website, how you can use contrast to make it visually more appealing, how you can use alignment to do the same thing. Proximity is how far something is away and how close something is, which is just really grouping things together, right? Your headings and your paragraphs are close with that button, and that when someone's looking at it, instantly knows that is those all are related, right? So it's really important. So yeah, did I forget one of them? Contrast, repetition, right? I forgot repetition.
Yeah.
Repetition is exactly what you're doing with the style guide. So making sure that all your headings look the same, your buttons look the same, your links look the same. So
It's so funny because for years I taught album design to photographers and walking through like how to lay out a really beautiful, wedding album or family portrait album or engagement album, and all of those principles apply to website design. Like it's all
Absolutely.
interchangeable. And I'd almost even argue, we as photographers, like if you're watching this, you understand a lot of these principles inherently,
Yep. And they're all the same.
Intuitively and inherently is combined becomes inherent. Well, anyways, it all applies to photography. I mean, we apply this when it comes to composition and when it comes to lighting, when it comes to all these things.
Yep.
We know this stuff. We just have to apply it into the space of web. And obviously there's some nuances, but definitely important. Really quickly, I want to transition. We're going to wrap this up. If you guys have questions, please feel free to throw them at us. Brian Schneider had asked, is there so many resources? Is there a cheat sheet? So yes, there's going to be a cheat sheet. Again, this is part of our 14-day marketing challenge for you as photographers. We're doing everything we can to try and make it so that you can weather this storm of this pandemic and of this crisis that we're all living through right now. And we're trying to give you some resources and some guidance and some help so that you can build a marketing machine that can hopefully make up for some of the lost revenue that you may not have been able to generate because of everything that's happened. And so if you're not already in the email program for it, basically we're going live here on the Facebook group every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's what this is right here. But we're also uploading this onto YouTube for replay. So if you want to watch it on our YouTube channel, you can. It's over there. It will be available here in the group as well, so you can always come back and watch it. Just remember, if you're watching the replay right now, hi, thank you for watching the replay. But remember that we can't see your comments live anymore. So sometimes I see that where people are commenting like, "Hey, it's so and so from so and so place," and it's like we can't say hi to you because you're not live. So if you want to join us live and actually have the interaction, we'd love to have you join us at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday to Friday, for this program. But if you go to getsproutstudio.com/firstaid, and we'll link that in the comments below as well. So anyone right now that's manning the Sprout Studio Facebook page commenting on this, if you can just link that up for us really quickly, that'd be great. Getsproutstudio.com/firstaid. We'll also post it into the group. But if you go there at the top of the page, we have an email box for you to put your email into. And every afternoon, we're basically emailing a summary of these. So Brian, the cheat sheet that you're asking about, that will come out this afternoon. We have a checklist and we have a full not a full transcription, but sort of a summary of everything that we talked about. So definitely encourage you to do that. And if you're on that sproutstudio.com/firstaid page, we also have a whole bunch of other resources as it relates to this COVID-19 crisis that we're all in right now. So we have articles, we have podcasts, we're linking other folks' podcasts and articles, anything that we can do that might guide you and help you during these difficult times, both on the mental and the physical health side of things, but also how do you respond to things if your clients need to reschedule? What kinds of things do you have to do legally from a contract standpoint? What do you have to do if you can't make something and have to find a backup photographer? Just different things like that. So that's just an ongoing resource pool that we're just continuing to add to and add to and add to. So definitely encourage you to go back to that page every day and just sort of see what's new. But getsproutstudio.com/firstaid is where you can find that. Otherwise, Chris, any parting thoughts here as it relates to web design or UI UX tweaks?
Absolutely. So I think I think the big thing is we've talked about a lot of things, right? We've talked about, as you mentioned, different fonts and how you can redo your navigation and everything. But you nailed it earlier, Brian, and you said like we're not looking like we don't think that going out and totally redesigning your website right now is like what you should be doing. And I think it makes it a little obvious, right? Because for example, if you have if you have some clients, prospective clients that are looking at like 3 or 4 photographers, and during that process research, they might look, a couple nights a week, they might look, and then the following couple weeks they come back and they look again. If in that time your website has done a complete 180, they might not remember who you were. Mm-hmm. They might, that's not the right person, and then they can't find you and you're off the list. So realistically, making small changes actually is a lot more effective. There's a thing called change blindness, which is a phenomenon that happens when less than 20 to 30% of something changes. People tend not to notice at all. So they have what's called change blindness. So that's always better. Making those subtle changes to your site over time is usually a better thing, and which is nice too, because if you have time to do it now, you don't have to build a full new website. You can look at, as long as your website's performing well, and your website is like performing well, in speed, then you don't even need a new platform. Like you can just go ahead and make those minor changes to your site. Play with the navigation, try to simplify that, install Mouseflow if you can. Brian was talking about that the other day. Mm-hmm. You really work on your content like Brian's been talking about. And yeah, absolutely. Cool. Small changes.
Awesome. Okay, let me move this over here. We had someone from the team that came and commented. So where is this? Right here. That's where you're going to want to go. GetSproutStudio.com/firstaid. Thank you guys for hanging out on this live broadcast. Thanks, Chris, for coming on and chatting.
You're welcome.
As always,
absolutely, anytime.
We don't have a hard time filling 30, 40 minutes chatting about this kind of stuff. So thank you guys for watching. And again, hope that you guys are staying safe, you're staying healthy. And if there's anything that we can do, if you need to talk, if you need advice, if you need feedback, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are here for you. And if there's anything content-wise that we can be creating for you to help you through some of these challenges, or if you have questions, or if you're going through some of these 14-day challenges and you want to brainstorm ideas or want to go through things, let us know. We're happy to help, and we want to make sure we can help you guys in any way that we can. So thank you guys for hanging out. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys soon.